Has something to do with religion, as the Republican candidates gathered in the Capitol over the weekend to stake their claim with social conservatives in the 2016 presidential election. Jeb Bush, Ted Cruz, and more pledged to stand up to what they see as hostility to Christianity in society and the world.
I believe 2016 will be the religious liberty election. Religious liberty has never been more threatened in America than right now today. I'll tell you this, morning is coming. Morning is coming.
When I was asked to intervene on behalf of a woman who could not speak up for herself, I stood on her side. I stood on the side of TERRI SCHIAVO and her parents. My belief is that religious freedom now is under attack in ways that we've never seen before. Whether it's the Obama administration or just the general culture. Well, in a big, diverse country, we need to make sure that we protect the right not just of having religious views, but the right of acting on those views. Religious conscience is one of the first freedoms in our country.
Unlike Hillary Clinton and President Obama, my views on marriage are not evolving with the polls. I believe in traditional marriage between a man and a woman.
In Foreign Relations Committee about, this has probably been 6 months ago, I said, you know what, maybe at the very least we shouldn't give our money to countries that persecute Christians. Any country that puts Christians to death for speaking their mind on religion, for changing their religion to Christianity, or for interfaith marriage, we shouldn't give them a penny, not one penny.
So Mark Halperin, give us a setting here. What's going on?
Well, this is an important constituency in the party, and no one, even Rand Paul, who's thought of more as a libertarian, or Jeb Bush, or John Kasich, who have problems in some ways with that wing of the party, no one wants to give up on that constituency. And the performances, most of them gave different speeches than they normally give, and they were all very much trying to use that Washington event to send a message around the country, because we focus so much on national security and economics, but this is a huge part of the party.
This is so fascinating to me, though, because one of Jeb Bush's huge weaknesses that should he win the nomination is going to be the TERRI SCHIAVO case. Most people do not think these guys are trying to make this into religion is persecuted. In fact, what they do on their wing of the party is tell other people how to live their lives. They want to imprint their religion on everybody else. And that's exactly what Jeb Bush did when he interfered in a personal matter. And Bill Frist, who's a good friend of mine and who I like, embarrassed himself, probably the biggest embarrassment of his life, by saying, I diagnosed this woman on videotape, and I think she's, you know, whatever. I mean...
You think TERRI SCHIAVO is going to be one of Jeb Bush's biggest problems?
I really do, because it speaks to his willingness to impose his religion on the electorate, and they are not going to like that in 2016.
If it's Hillary Clinton versus Jeb Bush, Governor Dean's exactly right. The Clinton people will talk about that intensely.
TERRI SCHIAVO.
Yep.
They will talk about it intensely.
People will not forget that, because every family sees something like that potentially happening in their own family, and they do not want the government to be in charge of what happens to their loved ones.
I don't know. What year was that?
I don't know what Ted Cruz is talking about.
Well, I just want to say really quickly, hold on, I need to close this up, wrap this up. I will tell you, I was not so sure why the left was so extraordinarily offended by those of us, and yes, I was one of those people that said, if I'm a dad and my daughter's in that state, and there have been 5, I don't want to redebate TERRI SCHIAVO, I'm just going to say, you're shocked and stunned and deeply saddened. There were 5 state doctors that looked at her. 3 of them said that she was not going to ever show any sign of brain activity, and 2 said she would. And you had parents who desperately wanted their daughter. Said to the husband, you don't want to take care of her, we'll take care of her.
And you had his own wishes saying, I don't want this to happen to me if anything ever bad happens. That is the nightmare,
Okay,
Joe.
so I don't know.
The nightmare.
See, what I don't understand is your voice raises. We had Al Franken, before he was a senator, demand in a letter to the president of MSNBC that I be fired at a time where I was spending most of my time criticizing George W.
I don't think
Bush's
you
policy.
should be fired.
No, but I'm just wondering, what is it about this case that makes liberals' voices tighten up
we see
and
the oppression.
rise?
We see oppression by people of the kind you just had on television telling us what to do because of their religious beliefs.
See, your voice is tightening up. I tell you what.
That is true. It is absolutely tightening it up. I believe that I ought to have freedom from people like Ted Cruz.
You are. All these years later, you were so. No, your voice is rising.
It is
I'm
rising.
trying to say, I looked at TERRI Schiavo's case as a father. I did not look at it as an evangelical. And I'm just fascinated at the rage and the anger that liberals have shown through the years, because a dad would say, well, if that happened to my daughter, I would love to take care of her. But anyway, let's move on.
But there is one element, which is it's one thing for a governor to get involved.
Right.
But then for Washington, D.C. to get involved, a lot of people find that part of it.
Right. And I had problems with that. I
don't think the governor should be involved. What business is it of the governors?
Okay.
This is a family matter.
Governor
just
Dean.
like abortion.
And exactly. And mom and dad are part of a family, and they want to protect their daughter.
And so is Terry. Terry left word with her husband. I am.
Is so amazing.
The reason, Joe, excuse me, if I could finish this. The reason, if you
look at your face. Look how angry you are. All these years later.
I am angry because I'm a physician. I have been in these kinds of positions.
I'm a dad.
Yeah, you may be. I'm a physician.
It was confirmed 4 times.
I have been in situations where the patient would like to do one thing, and I never believed the government should override the patient, and that is what Jeb Bush did for political reasons. And that was wrong.
So that would be the answer as to whether this could come up and be.
Yeah.
I don't think it's fair to say he did it for political reasons. He did it out of conscience.
Yeah, we'll let liberals sit in the corner and scream about TERRI Schiavo.
And most people will be proud liberals and agree with us.
Oh my God!
Because libertarians agree with us on this one.
Holy cow!
Yes, they do.
This is
You'll find out. We're going to find out.
Okay, David Remnick.
David, would you like to talk about something other than TERRI Schiavo?
Well, I don't know why you're condescending to
I'm not being condescending.
He has real conviction.
Yelling 10 years later.
I think he believes in something.
Right.
But I don't know what Ted Cruz.
David, so do I.
I understand.
Do you?
Yes.
Well, why
I
are you
do.
being so condescending to to say that you think that he believes in something?
I think he's allowed to believe in something.
He is, and the mere suggestion that he believes in something that I don't is condescending, and it makes me sad. But what would you like to say?
When I don't understand what Mr. Cruz is talking about when he says that religion has never been under more ferocious attack in America than now. What does he mean? Is he trying to arouse the fear of a base voter, which I understand, and therefore support, or does he mean something? What conviction is he trying to put forward? What ideas is he trying to put forward? I just listened here, Bill Kristol was telling us that Donald Trump could be a serious player in the Republican Party debates. I mean, if that's true, that's very sad. I don't know what ideas he's trying to put forward other than his own status or his own foolish public image, whatever it is. I don't know what Ted Cruz is talking about when he's about history, about anything, and he's a very intelligent man. I do not know what he's doing other than trying to arouse the fears of the base.
So let's sort through a few things. First of all, Bill Kristol in his op-ed said that Donald Trump and Rand Paul
I know he doesn't support him.
We're at the bottom of their list of the Republicans that would be least helpful for the Republican Party were they to win the nomination. What he did say throughout that piece, though, was that
I read it.
Okay, well then you know the answer to the questions that you asked.
No, I'm just saying. But what is Ted Cruz talking about?
Okay, so now we'll move on to Ted Cruz. I was just buttoning that up on what you said about because you know what Bill Kristol's point was. I'm not sure why you said what you said if you read the column, because you understand it. But let's talk about Ted Cruz. There is a feeling of evangelicals on, let's say, traditional marriage, that the world that they knew in 2004, 2005, the world that they actually knew in 2010, 2011, when Barack Obama was afraid to say that he supported gay marriage,
I agree,
changed all at once. And we went from Barack Obama in 2011 saying that he was against same-sex marriage to, was it a baker or a florist or somebody 2 years later being told that they would be forcibly compelled to deliver pizza or give flowers or cater a gay wedding. I think that probably is, I didn't hear Ted Cruz's speech, but I think a general feeling of unrest is that this is happening so quickly. And it's caught up on us so quickly that 3 years ago Barack Obama was on our side because that's where he thought the middle of America was. And now we're being told we're going to be compelled by the force of the federal government. You talk about the federal government getting involved in things to deliver flowers to a gay marriage that our faith and the Jewish faith has found to be immoral for 4,000 years. I think that probably lies at the heart of it.
Do you agree with what Ted Cruz is saying about the degree of what's going on now, the level of the rhetoric that he's spooning out?
I'm just explaining what he said. Would I say that in a speech? No, I wouldn't say that in a speech. I would say, but I wouldn't even say this in a speech. I'll say it on this air. Cultural elites have a condescending, aggressive view of conservative evangelicals, and I would also say of Orthodox Jews, that they do not have of other faiths. So yes, there is a hostility, whether it's a latent hostility towards conservative Christians and Orthodox Jews, that there isn't of other faiths. But should that rise to the level of giving a speech here saying Christianity is under attack?
This is what concerns me, and it's whipped up in the obvious corners. I believe I have plenty of contact with evangelicals, and Orthodox Jews are in my own family, and we have these debates and these arguments all the time. What concerns me is the level of rhetoric and the whipping up of fury and anger, and does not elevate the debate, certainly doesn't elevate a presidential debate, and so that we've gotten to the point where a comical figure, a comical blowhard like Donald Trump is conceively a player.
Let me wrap this up.
I think you've been really condescending, by the way, after using that word. No,
yes,
everybody that you don't agree with, you have been condescending to that.
And you're misunderstanding the analysis of Trump.
I totally, by the way, the notion that we have changed very rapidly on gay marriages is absolutely true in historical terms. And I think for a lot of people, it is incredibly difficult to take on board. And I understand that with my heart and soul, as much as I believe that this is something that's necessary.
Okay, so, and Ted Cruz is brilliant on being able to sort of get right in there in terms of base and religion, and I wouldn't count him out. In terms of Trump, I would just say everyone needs to stop overreacting to the line that he could have a serious impact on this race, because as you pointed out last week, he has the ability to liquefy people in one 20-second soundbite. Would you like an example? Him talking to George Stephanopoulos, when George Stephanopoulos asked him about Clinton, he just said, who are you? How could you even talk to me about the Clintons? That nobody has the guts, by the way, nobody, and there are people at this table who don't have the guts to really talk about that. He does.
About George
yes, absolutely. And he does on other issues as well, and he could liquefy a candidate in one soundbite during a debate. As far as TERRI Schiavo is concerned, you both are guilty. Very guilty of having strong feelings about it. Not just Howard, you too. And your debate proves you wrong that she will not have a small role or a minor, role in the presidential election. This will come up and it will be a big conversation.
You're saying because Howard was wound up a decade later about it, that
I think that you saying that he is wound up is you actually deflecting from the argument.
I'm not deflecting. That
is deflecting.
Who has talked about TERRI Schiavo? No, who's talked about TERRI Schiavo in the past decade?
Jeb Bush.
Other than Jeb yesterday and Howard today.
I was on a plane and I read an article about it, and I was pulled in. I mean, as if it was yesterday. Okay? So everybody has strong feelings about it, including you.
I have very strong feelings that it happened. Mika, let me finish. That it happened a decade ago.
That's my line.
Okay?
You can't say that.
No, that it happened a decade ago, and the idea that this is going to be a central issue in 2016 is preposterous. That's what I have strong feelings about.
It's going to happen.
Well, I think you had strong feelings as a
father. The fact that you
too.
and I have such strong feelings today.
Will be a
absolutely. If Jeb gets the nomination.
Okay, David Remnick, thank you, I think. Still ahead this morning. Senator Bob Corker joins us here at the table, plus singer James Taylor, who's using his latest album to jump into the middle of sports' greatest rivalry. We'll explain just ahead. You're watching Morning Joe.